Who in here is a designer of some sort? Interaction, visual? Okay, great. Now, who's an engineer, programmer? A few people, okay. A project manager, any other kind of developer? Okay, now who's in what we call business? Not that everyone else I didn't say wasn't in business, but finance and operations and marketing. Okay, so I have an apology to make to you right off the bat. And you'll probably see why. I'm going to come down a little bit hard on traditional business. I'm assuming you're not traditional business people. I like to make fun of business people, at least on stage, because there are a lot of things in business culture that are really worth making fun of. And so I will make fun of some of it, but none of it's personal. Just a little bit about me really quickly. I am a designer. Actually, I have a car design background. I didn't go into the industry because it was horribly siloed and just didn't seem like a lot of fun, but cars are still really near and dear to my heart. Instead, after school, I went into information design, which at the time was mostly in print. And the nice thing about information design, especially then, is it exposed me to some really big data problems, some really big data sets and catalogs and indexes and things that were difficult problems to solve in order to create understanding for people without having the kind of digital media that allows us to sort of flip it around and see it in different ways. But professionally, I really grew up in the interaction design world, starting with things like kiosks and presentations, and then moving into CD-ROMs, if you remember, if any one of you were alive back then, and then way too many websites, and along the way, some specialized devices that don't exist anymore, so they really don't matter. As Bartek mentioned, I write a bunch of books, mostly focused on different aspects of design, and I've done consulting, both brand strategy and online strategy and business strategy. I've done a couple startups. All of this is a way of saying that I am very similar to you. I'm a designer that has understood that in order to be more effective, I need to learn a little bit more and more about how the rest of the development, the rest of the organization, the rest of business works if I want to have the influence that I think I deserve being a designer, and certainly if I want to have the influence to create the kinds of things for customers that I envision. So much so that business and strategy have become so important to me that I went out and got an MBA by accident, sort of by accident. If you had asked me 15, 20 years ago if I was interested in going back to school, and if so, what degree I would get as a master's degree, MBA was on the bottom of the list. But as it turns out, I went to a really interesting program that was an incredibly good experience for me because I learned the kinds of things on the other side of the table that often frustrated me as a designer. And so I'm going to be talking about some of those things that I learned in that process. And these days now, I help a lot of other people through that process. I run a program, I actually run 3 MBA programs focused entirely on different aspects of innovation, but at the intersection of design, design thinking, design process, business, and then systems thinking and sustainability, et cetera. So I'm going to start with a story. A few years ago, almost 3 years ago now, Instagram was purchased by Facebook. Does anyone remember how much money Facebook paid for Instagram? $2 billion? It's a little high. I know it doesn't sound like much now, but at the time, anyone else? $1.1 billion. And at the time, everyone sort of went, what? Because it was a lot of money. The interesting question is here's why 1.1 billion? Why not 2 billion? Why not $500 million? How did they calculate what this company was worth? And that's probably an answer that won't ever be answered unless we could interview everyone that was sort of in the deal. But this is a common issue when companies get purchased or when they go public. How do we value them? How do we know how much they're worth? Now, the day before the sale, it was not worth $1.1 billion. Anyone have any idea what the books said, the financial books said that the company was worth? Take a guess. How much? Zero. Could be. It was $86 million, just about. And part of the reason why it was $86 million was the week before the sale, a bunch of investors put in $50 million. Right? So roughly it was about a $36 million company if you were to look at the balance sheet. That's what it would be worth. But it didn't sell for $86 million. It sold the day after the deal. It went from $86 million to 1.1 billion. And there's a difference there, I've done the math for you, of a little over $1 billion. Now, that's kind of a surprising amount. And at the time, people were surprised that it was that much. Now, after WhatsApp and everything else these days, it looks like chump change. But the question remains, how did they get that $1 billion extra dollars? This isn't just a phenomenon of internet startups and digital startups. You know, every company that goes public, for the most part, most companies that get sold, certainly if they're healthy, they sell for a lot more money than the books say that they're worth. And the difference is this: relationships. That $1 billion was the value Facebook was willing to pay for the relationships that Instagram bought. And, if you think back those slides, which is the bigger number? What the books say, or what the value of relationships are? Well, it's the value of relationships by quite a bit more. Well, that's what we do. We help build those relationships. And that's why we're so valuable to these companies, which is pretty much to say every organization, because essentially that's where all the best kind of value lies. But we need to pay a little bit more attention to it ourselves, because within organizations, when companies make these decisions, they usually don't make decisions with relationships in mind. They make decisions for very practical reasons. We need to save money here, we need to spend money there, we need more customers, we need to build a new building. There's a lot of things that get decided where relationship isn't reminded remembered in the context of that conversation. And that's where we have an opportunity to step forward and help remind our business peers, the rest of our peers in the organization, whether it's a client or whether it's our own company, that this is what we're actually building, because this is the most valuable thing that we could possibly be building. And that means we need a new definition of value. We need to have a new kind of conversation around value, because we don't talk about value in the right way. The business world struggles with design often because designers see value that doesn't get accounted for in the accounting, it doesn't get accounted for financially. And that's part of the struggle that we have with business decisions, organizational decisions that make us uncomfortable, because we see different kinds of value that the rest of our peers often don't. When most of the world hears the word value, they think of money. And money is one kind of value. It's an important one, but it turns out it's probably the least important one to relationships. And I'll show you why in a second. Now, business people will also recognize another form of value, and that's mostly in terms of function or performance. And this is why business people are literally taught price and performance. That's how they do product development, price and function. That's what drives decisions about what we should make and then how we should make it. So by the time that we get a design brief that says we want to build a whatever, an app, a website, a experience of some sort, etc., it's been decided strategically on the basis of price and performance, which doesn't give us much opportunity to build a healthy or a growing or a valuable relationship, because it's never been part of the decision process up to that point in the first place. Very often, the decision is to build the wrong thing entirely, and we as designers and engineers and developers are left to try to make that wrong thing as good as possible. And that's the essence of sort of why design needs to be more involved with strategy. Now, business people know that there's more there. They see the stories like Facebook or Instagram. They saw the $1 billion extra. They're not missing this. It's mostly that the tools that they've been taught and the processes that they use don't account for it, so they don't know how to get to it. And so the business world, especially economists, are busy trying to figure out what that extra value is, and they come up with stuff like this. They know loyalty is important, and so there's this idea of lifetime customer value, and you don't have to take a picture of this, you don't have to remember it, you will never use it because it's entirely wrong, but it represents how non-designers are trying to figure out how to quantify this other extra value. And this isn't the only way. There's other ways like brand value. The problem with this is they only make room for things that are easily quantified, and mostly quantified into dollars or some sort of currency. This too is wrong. There's no agreed upon standards for brand values. There's sort of 7 standards out there in the brand world, But those things don't even get counted by official accounting tools and accounting processes. So there's no agreement on this, and it's wrong, which is one of the reasons why people don't trust them. But at least we know that people are working on trying to figure out how to work with that extra value. In my program, my colleagues and I, we teach our students that there's at least 5 different kinds of value. And then in this community right here, these probably aren't too surprising. In fact, we've talked about some of them. We've talked about emotions today. Other speakers have mentioned meaning. We know that there's financial and functional value there. We know that no matter what kinds of products and services that we're delivering, we're always delivering these kinds of value, or we at least always have the opportunity to. And the reason why this is important is that the only place that value exists is in the context of a relationship. No relationship, value doesn't get exchanged. It doesn't get built, it doesn't get maintained, etc. And the last speaker, Mike, talked a little bit about the need for having relationships. This is why. Because that's the only place we ever create or realize value. And a healthy relationship is one in which value is mutual. But many of our business relationships aren't healthy because they aren't designed to be mutual, and they're not designed to be bidirectional. Now, if you sat down and have a conversation with someone, and some of our business peers, they will admit that, of course, value has to be exchanged. We give them this, they give us money for that, right? But when the decisions are being made about what to create and how to create it, often this is forgotten. The other challenge around all of this is that value is dynamic. It's changing all of the time, and this is really frustrating for business people because you can't easily create business plans, financial plans, operations plans, marketing plans for something that's always changing. And if you try to build a lifetime customer experience, you have to make room for a tremendous amount of change within that lifetime, a lot of which we can't see ahead of time. And therefore, we need new business tools and we need new design tools to handle these kinds of changing value all the time. The other thing is that value is emergent, especially in the context of customer needs, of organizational intent, and of the offer that we decide to create for people. Catching up here. This brings us back to relationships and why they're everything to business. They're also everything to people, to our personal relationships. But the problem is relationships don't show up in spreadsheets. They don't show up in business tools. They don't really even show up in our tools very well. We need to improve our own tools, not just the tools that our business peers are using as well. And part of this is that they do a terrible job valuing or measuring the qualitative value as opposed to the quantitative value. One of the other things I want to impress upon you is that the reason why experience is so critical is that's the only place relationship happens. You can't have a relationship, you can't build, maintain, or evolve a relationship without having an experience. This makes experience incredibly strategic. It's incredibly important to us because if there's no relationship, there's no value being built or exchanged. So all these 3 things are important because they're all nested. They're all influencing each other. There we go. Okay. This is the system that we design for. Designing value. A little bit ahead of myself here. Designing value, designing relationships, designing the experiences where those take place. And it doesn't really matter whether your user is a user or a customer or a constituent, whether it's a government talking to a citizen, whether it's a company talking to customers or partners or employees, whether it's people dealing with each other, because the very same system of value, relationship, experience is just as true with our personal relationships as it is with our commercial relationships. It's true of government, as Thomas's presentation sort of showed us earlier this morning. It's true of NGOs. It's true of sort of everything that we design or hope to design, and we have to figure out new ways of remembering these things while we're actually designing them. Meaningful value is the most important kind, by the way. It's the deepest one. It's the most stable, therefore it's the hardest to change. So when we make meaningful connections with others, again, whether it's a personal relationship or a customer relationship, that's the strongest relationship we can have. the strongest point at which we could design or create a strategy for a relationship as well. And whether you call it service design or experience design or interaction design doesn't really matter. Not big on words and terms and differences. This is at the heart of what all of us as designers, developers, and then even business people are after. So this describes two different worlds. This is also sort of the world that I found myself in when I was just studying business in an MBA program. It's the world between the quantitative, am I on the right side? Quantitative and the qualitative. And business has focused for 70 years or more on the quant. And the quant is really important, but it doesn't tell the whole story. Designers, other kinds of developers, we sort of live on the qual side. We really value the qualitative. And often we feel really frustrated and slighted when the rest of our peers ignore the qual because the quant is so easy to measure and makes it so much more compelling. And it's easy to ignore the qual because it's mostly invisible. Everything, those three things, meaning, identity, and emotion, they're entirely invisible. Makes them much more difficult to work with. But we have to remember those are the more important values. Those are the ones that are literally worth more if we can build the right kind of relationships. Now, you've probably heard, as I have, people say, especially in the context of a development meeting or a client meeting, people aren't going to pay more for that. They won't pay more. We can't do that because it'll be too expensive. And the very same people that are saying this, which are essentially parroting back business dogma, don't even reflect that behavior themselves. So that whenever you hear someone say people won't pay more for things, ask them, look at their watch, look at their clothes, ask them what kind of car they drive. Because my bet is that they're not wearing the very cheapest watch, clothes, driving the most inexpensive car that they could get away with to meet their functional needs. We all do this. We do this because of the qualitative value that gets exchanged when we pay more. It's called premium value. But it's business dogma to say that nobody pays more for things, or people won't pay more for things, even though there's tons and tons of examples where people do. Porsche. Any brand name, any premium brand exists because it's not true. But we often have to figure out the nice way to point out that it's not true, that what our client or what our managers or what our leaders are saying just isn't true, and that it's not even true of their own behavior. So we need to be focused on the hidden part of the value because it's the biggest part, it's the most important part, but our peers can't see it. And we have trouble because our tools don't describe it very well either. That's part of the evolution we need to do. Now, the business world, the accounting world, calls the first two book value. They're quantitative. They're easy to measure in numbers. In the accounting world, what do you do with that extra $1.01 billion the day after Facebook buys you? Or now, if it's WhatsApp, $3 or $4 billion? You have to put it somewhere. Literally, there's a cell in the spreadsheet, in the balance statement, called goodwill, and they shove those billions into there, and then everything nicely, magically balances. But the day before, nothing was in that cell. Nothing was in that entry. So they invent something called goodwill that just says, we're really nice people, and so they gave us an extra billion. Well, that's a problem for us, because business treats it as sort of this capricious thing that happens sort of randomly, and if you do a good job, people like you. We're the ones that create that value. And we need to be able to point to it, we need to be able to measure it, and we need to be able to remind everyone on the team of that value and our ability to help create it while decisions are getting made. Because otherwise it's just an empty cell in the balance sheet. Remember the Instagram example. So this is what you point to. This is one of the examples you can point to when you're in a conversation where someone says, we need to stick to the basics. Or when times aren't good, that stuff's for when times are good. Or times are good. When times are lean, we need to sort of hunker down and just do the minimum. That's not how you build relationships. It's not how you build premium value. But we have to remind people about that all the time. Another way to say this is that those companies, just like those people, who focus on total value, meaning both the quantitative and the qualitative. You can't have a focus just on one and be terribly successful. Those who focus on total value create more of it more often. It's as simple as that. And who's good at developing premium value? Well, that's us. That's our world. We're all about creating experiences and relationships when we do it well, when we do what we're supposed to, when we use our skills. That means all of us, every company, everyone in this room is in the relationship business. And that's a revelation to a lot of business people because they just don't think that way. And even if they agree with you, when they go back to doing their set processes, their weekly meetings, their plans, their reports, etc., they keep forgetting that they're in the relationship business because all of the tools they use don't have relationships show up anywhere. This is our essential problem. It's not tactical, it's strategic. Relationships are entirely strategic. You don't get them by accident, and you don't do them after the fact. They have to be part of the business planning of the organization itself, or else they're just added on. They're weak and they're shallow, and they may or may not happen. But this also makes experience incredibly strategic. Experience design, experience strategy is important because that's the only way to make this thing actually work. We don't if we don't design for the relationship and we don't pay attention to the experience, all of it falls apart. We don't get any of it. So the better the experience, the better the relationship, the more value that emerges from it. This is a famous argument from a book called The Experience Economy by Joseph Pine and James Gilmore. And it says that as we move from commodity to a product business to a service business to an experience business, everything goes up. Your costs go up, but your profit margin goes up, your revenue goes up, your customer engagement and loyalty can go up. Everything sort of gets better if you want to move towards that kind of a business. Now, there's a problem here, because anyone who's ever called up customer service knows that it's probably a bad experience. Every now and then, if you went to Toby's Bank, it's going to be an awesome experience, but that's a service. How are they a service providing an experience? Anyone who's ever used a great product knows that it's either a good or a bad experience. So the essential problem with this statement that a lot of business people think is, oh, well, we're not an experience business. That's for Starbucks and Disney and other companies. This is the reality. We're all experience businesses. We're all providing experiences. And if we don't give attention to that, we're just providing crappy experiences. And that's a lot of business. We know it. We see it in our own companies and with our own clients. They don't think that they're an experience business, so they're not willing to pay more for experience. Or they're down, that's a nice to have, but we got to, ship with our MVP, and that stuff we'll get to in a rev or two. That's not the way to look at this, and we know that instinctively. Now, you have to have an understanding of what are the elements of experience. We teach that there's 6 dimensions of experience, and every one of these elements is an opportunity to differentiate and to design a better experience. But you need to know what those things are. You can't just treat it as this nice word that hangs in the cloud, and wouldn't it be nice if we create meaningful experiences? We need to define these things. We need to build tools around them, and I'll show you some tools in a second. But we don't have the right tools yet to build total value. That's our challenge. It's your challenge as well as mine. We're trying to build some in my program, but we got a ways to go. And we're at a disadvantage because experience tools, these kinds of qualitative value tools, we're about 60 years behind financial tools. And that puts us at a big disadvantage. It's hard to have a conversation when there's people who have been brought up, trained, and have experience in business on the quantitative only. It's hard to have a conversation about how important the qualitative is when we show up with, pretty shallow tools to describe what we're trying to talk about. We can point to examples like Facebook and Instagram and whatnot, and that might get our peers' attention. But we also have to be able to back it up with data, or at least examples from the field. So we need to collect more information and new information about relationships so that we can create better relationships. This is my model of meaning. When we teach meaning in our program, we teach that meaning is the connection the prioritization and the expression of 15 core elements. It's sort of like a 15-color color palette. We teach this stuff as definitive and tangible, that we can research for these things, and we can work with them, and we can put them right into business strategy. And I'll show you that as an example in a second. And the reason why is this is where the highest value lives. It's where the deepest relationships live. So you can't just say, oh, we're going to try to create meaningful experiences, or we're going to make a meaningful product, if you don't have a mechanism or a model on which to build meaning. And these things are, they exist. We're building these kinds of tools now. We can be doing it deliberately, rather than in the past we've done it intuitively or sometimes accidentally. Which means that we need to use qualitative research tools. And you all know some of them. You're already using observation and ethnographic tools, etc. Here's a couple more interviews and conversations. We can play certain kinds of games with our customers or our partners or whoever we're researching. Laddering here is the most important tool if you want to get at meaning. Because we're not good at talking about these things, even ourselves. So it's really hard for us to interview our customers, our users, our participants, our partners, whoever, around these things. We need tools that get at them indirectly, because you just can't come up to someone and say, oh, what's the most meaningful thing in your life? How do you answer that? We're not good at that. But we do have tools that help us get at it. And some of these tools then allow us to have this conversation visually. These are meaning cards. We teach our students to make these things. So for every one of the 15 core meanings, they make cards that represent these things out of imagery. And those images can be very culturally contextualized, so we have to be careful. But because people can't have this conversation verbally really easily, they can have it visually often. We can throw these cards on the table and say, when you finish your report, which of these cards feels like how you feel when you do that? And they'll pick ones up. They all look a little bit different, but it helps us have these conversations about these often unconscious or subconscious qualitative attributes of relationship, of a value, of experience, because we can't have them often very consciously. They don't usually work that way. And that then gives us data as to traditional design elements, so that when we make design decisions, now we know what the triggers are. And I'm using the word trigger very carefully, because we design, every design decision we make, every one of those things on those 6 dimensions of experience, trigger meaning, trigger value, trigger relationship. So if we don't know what those are for this set of customers in this context, what happens is, when I was in design school, we were taught to go redesign the world in our image, and it was about our favorites. I like the color chartreuse this week, so I'm going to use chartreuse, and I'm going to use baby teeth and Gaudi old style. That's not a professional way to design if you care about someone's experience. We have to know, well, if I use a sans serif here, or if I use an old style, or if I use a serif, what is that trigger in them? And I want to be careful to say that this data isn't making the decision for us, but it's part of the understanding, it's part of the context we need to know as designers, so that we don't make the wrong decision. A good example of this is, in the eco world, bamboo as a material, for some people says, ooh, eco, new, hip, natural, this is a better thing, it's made out of bamboo. And so you see lots of bamboo products, including things like bamboo underwear and clothes, etc. But to some people, bamboo says, dirty, inaccurate hippies, right? It's not for us to decide which is right and which is wrong. It's for us to know what this decision of making this product out of bamboo, or making it green, or having a certain typeface, or a certain form, or a certain smell or taste, etc., what that triggers. Does it create the experience that we're after? Because if it doesn't, it may be my favorite material of the moment, but I shouldn't be using it. That's a different approach to design than was certainly taught in my day. We are curators of all this information. The data doesn't make the decision for us, it just helps us inform our own inspiration to make the decisions that help create the experiences that help enable the relationships we want people to have. And so we teach our students how to do these. They're not mood boards. I hate mood boards. I hate mood boards because mood boards are essentially either useless or unprofessional, and they're mostly about our preferences, not about our customers' preferences that we've learned through research. So we need these new tools to help us design new experiences, new relationships. Now, we've seen a lot of journey maps today, and the typical journey map, there's nothing wrong with it, but for the most part, journey maps plot touch points, and they sort of compare front-end functions and back-end functions together. And there's bits of, attributes of the relationship, of the experience, because what goes into our user research gets plotted into these things. But if we're not researching the qualitative values, they never get plotted on a journey map. There's no value reference here. Most of them don't reference meaning. Almost none of them reference emotions, for instance. So how could you ever design an experience that creates a great, valuable relationship if it's not even part of your design process? And that's that we need to understand state of mind, because all of these things go into the state of mind our customers are having at any given time. And it's up to us to shift that state of mind into a different state. And state of mind is simply what you're thinking and feeling at any given moment. So you may have a situation of stimulus and response, and that's changing someone's state of mind. There's about 5 different elements of state of mind. Some of them we can influence, some of them we can't. Some of the ones that we can influence the most are behavioral responses, and that's where most of the triggers, the design decisions, have their biggest impact. We can deal mostly with memories, behavioral responses, and mental models. And we use core meanings as a way of designing for mental models. So we can, in fact, get to the majority of someone's state of mind, understanding it, and then shifting it as a design process if we have these tools. Now, usually in a journey map, what happens is that we plot products and services and touch points. If we're going to do relationships right, we have to think about this differently. We need to design a narrative that is about meaning and emotions first before we plot what are the products and services and the offerings we're going to create that are going to enable or trigger those meanings and those emotions. And Tracy described today Freitag and the hero's journey, etc. I want you to understand that there aren't predetermined templates. There are in some media, like if if the heroine doesn't kiss the hero in a romance novel by page sort of like 86, it's thrown out by the publisher for a rewrite. Some media does, in fact, have a bunch of preset templates. But we don't have to stick to preset templates if we're designing and creating on the fly from the very materials that we're researching, the very data that we're getting from our customers. And so once we understand the story that we want people to have, the story that they're having, that they want to tell, the story that we want to tell them, the experience they want to have, then we can design that story, and at that point we can now figure out which touch points are going to make that story happen. And most of them aren't going to be touch points that we already have. And that's where strategy comes in. That's where we decide the difference between the experience our customers are having and the one they want to have and the one we want them to have because we're going to try to exceed their expectations. That difference becomes all of our design opportunities. But it may be that we need to create an event or a class or an advertisement or an entirely new product to make this happen. And that's why this is strategic, because we can't just take the stuff that we're delivering now and give it a new sort of patina and try to fit it into an experience like this. It's not going to create the relationships that we want. So the difference between a journey map, which has gotten us a long way, and a wave line, which is what I've been showing you, are these. They're about building a narrative from scratch based on meanings, emotions, identity, as well as functions and price, building it into a story that creates the kind of relationship over time that we want to have and that we can derive a lot of value through. And there's strategic tools that we can use to align our meaning priorities with our customers or the team that's working with it, with the customers and with the company that they're working for. And so some of these tools, this is one URL you might want to take a photo of. We're putting these tools online, but they're beginner tools. We have a lot of work to do to bridge these differences. And I want to emphasize that business people they're extremely confident. They're very confident about things that often aren't true. And there's a lot of myths of business that we have to confront that just simply aren't true, but they've been told by their peers and they've been told by their teachers that this stuff is true, and this is in the way of us having a productive relationship. And likewise, we have a lot of myths of design that we have to confront and rethink too. So it's only fair. This is a typical kind of design process with a strategic component here. And what we need to do is figure out how to get into the conversation of what we're going to make in the first place. Because we're usually on this side where we get a design brief that says, we're going to make a phone this week, or we're going to make a store, or we're going to make this kind of product. And the first thing a lot of designers do is look at it and go, why are we making this? This isn't the right thing. But it's too late to have that conversation because it was made at the strategic level. We need to take the customer research that we have that's qualitative, that speaks to the very value that's most important, and figure out how to move it into the strategic conversations. If we can't get into that room, we need to figure out how to get those insights into those rooms without us. Because I'm telling you, we know our customers on this level usually way better than our peers do, especially if they're relying only on market research, which is pretty much impoverished. I will reiterate, we need to help design new tools. Not just design tools, but business tools. How many of you seen the business model canvas? That's great, because this is a business tool that allows a designerly approach to building better business plans, basically. And it's very much experience-based and customer-focused, which is great, because that helps us. We need to design even better tools for the other parts of business, like how many people have ever heard of a SWOT analysis? Almost everyone, right? Well, I guarantee you that almost never have you seen a SWOT analysis done correctly. Because people just sit and list, like, oh, yeah, these are our opportunities, and here's our strengths, and here's our weaknesses, and it's all just off the cuff. They guess at them, and this is lazy. Because none of these are usually the biggest decision drivers for our customers. That comes from ethnographic research. We need to know what the drivers of our customers' decisions are, not the things that we think are great about ourselves. That only comes from environmental analysis. We have to go out there and talk to people. And then we have to use that to do the right kind of competitive analysis. And now we have the real decision drivers. Now we can build a SWOT analysis that measures the very things that our customers are making their decisions based on. And they're going to be entirely different things. Because these things would have never occurred to the marketing group or the strategy group in the beginning because they've never had those conversations with people before. Same thing with positioning statements. I'm running out of time here. This is a typical positioning statement template. It's used by almost every business student and every business person out there. And this is how they fill it out. We're this. They plot all this stuff out. The same way they do a SWOT analysis. It's Mad Libs. I kid you not, this is how most strategy is done. People just plot this stuff up and agree to it, and that's not how you do this correctly. We're the ones that can help them do this better. But we need to get into the room, and we need to get into those conversations. So to conclude, I've got 5 seconds. It's great, I have five slides, I think. Value is more than financial. In fact, the other parts of value are way more important than the financial value. Everyone's in the relationship business. Everyone's in the experience business. It's not qualitative versus quantitative, although very often it feels that way, especially if you're on one side of the table and the client or the business people are on the other side of the table. It's quantitative and qualitative. And we need to become comfortable with that, and we need to help change the language so that everyone on the team understands this and can focus on it. I'll say it one last time. We need new tools. We're just at the beginning of figuring this stuff out, and you need to help us make new tools. You can't just wait for others to do it. And that's it. So go out there and make great experiences that create great relationships.